My name is Lori Haight, and I serve as the Career Services Coordinator at SILS. And I want to welcome you today to our SILS Connections May edition, where we are starting some virtual alumni programming. And I'm thrilled that you guys are here with us today, and especially excited to thank our speaker, Kate Moran, today, who's going to be talking about user experience and answer any questions you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
All right, thanks, Lori. Yeah, so I guess this is going to be pretty informal. Like, I don't have slides or anything that I've prepared. I figured I would just talk a little bit about my background and kind of what I did after SILS and where I ended up, because it was not where I thought I was going to be. So when I was at SILS, I graduated from the BSIS program in 2013, and then I got my master's right after, and I graduated with that in 2015, which if you think you want to get a master's, I highly recommend that. What's that program called? Is it the dual degree, Lori?
Yes, the MSIS is the dual degree.
Okay. Yeah, so I highly recommend that. It worked out really well for me because I was able to just push through and get that master's right away. I have heard from other people that it's a lot harder to leave and then come back to school, and I can definitely see that being the case. But while I was getting my master's, I was working at IBM, and I actually knew I wanted to do user experience ever since I found it through SILS. So I thought I was going to do English. And then I realized that if you have an English major, it's really hard to get a good job sometimes, unless you want to be a journalist or an English teacher. So I was like, that's not really what I want to do. So I started looking around and discovered that we had one of the best information science schools, and I didn't even know what information science was. But once I did, and I found out what UX was, I was like, that is what I want to do. And it just really spoke to me. And I think a lot of people who end up working in UX, they have similar stories like that. Like, the people who get into it tend to be really passionate about it. So I knew I was going to do UX, but it's hard, as some of you may be finding out or about to find out if you want to get a UX career. It's hard to start in UX because there's this kind of problem or phenomenon where everybody wants to hire someone who's had 5 years of experience in UX. So maybe you know that because you've been looking at like job descriptions and things. So I was really frustrated by that because I was like, where am I supposed to get those first 5 years of experience from if nobody's gonna give me a chance to start? So I started working actually as a developer at IBM, and I was like, that'll be my foot in the door, and then I'll pivot to UX. So basically I started in-house, and my long-term goal was always to like get into UX. But I soon discovered that IBM really wanted me to stay in development because they needed more developers. So they were motivated to not let me change. But so I got a little bit of experience there with in-house UX, because even though my role was a developer, I was constantly trying to like break out of that. So I was constantly like hanging out with the design people and like talking to them at lunch, and bothering my manager and saying like, hey, let me run a little short qualitative research project, research study for this upcoming project. So I got a little bit of a taste of in-house work there. And then when I was getting my master's, I found out that Viget Labs, which I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them, but they're based in Durham. I don't know, Lori, do you guys still have a relationship with them? I know a lot of SILS people end up there.
Yeah, we do. Kurt Ulrich has come back. He came back fall of 18 and did an information session. And so we've had a smattering of SILS students either reaching out to him, he's volunteered that, or taken on roles there.
That's
so
awesome.
We do have a connection.
Kurt is actually how I ended up like getting involved with Viget too, because I think he graduated a year before me or something, and he just spoke so highly of it. But anyway, so it's kind of like, I would say, your typical like small to medium sized like hip UX agency. So it was a very different setting that I got to work in, and they actually had a great program. I think they still do it too. which they call an apprenticeship, a UX apprenticeship, which when I discovered it, I was like, I wish more companies would do this, because it addresses that exact problem of, okay, I'm supposed to have 5 years experience, but nobody's going to hire me until I have that 5 years experience. So what Viget did was they would hire people who already had a degree, like maybe a bachelor's degree or some amount of experience in UX. So you weren't quite as entry level as an intern. You were like a little more advanced than that. And so they would let you learn in a very hands-on way, which is honestly the best way to learn any kind of UX topic. Like there's a reason that they don't want people who have less than 5 years experience. And a big part of that is because you really do get better at this the more you do it, because you just see more situations. You start to see like the themes and the patterns in user behavior, and you learn a lot of that at SILS, which I didn't even realize at the time how valuable that was until I started working in UX. But you're actually, like right now, you're building a really good foundation that will help you a lot. But you do need that applied piece too. Like you really need the real life experience. So I was really happy that Viget did that. So I got a little bit of an agency taste there. And then eventually when I graduated from the master's program, I ended up working at Nielsen Norman Group through a very convoluted way. Like, I don't know, are you guys all familiar with Nielsen Norman Group, NNG? Yeah, I remember Professor Berquist made us sign up for the Alert Box newsletter and sort of introduced us to Jacob Nielsen. So by the time I graduated, I was already a big NNG fan. And when I saw they were hiring, I was like, wouldn't that be funny? Like, I'll just apply. Like, I'm definitely not going to get it, but I'll just try. But it worked out. So this is like, NNG is a really strange company, and there's not a ton of like very research focused consultancies out there right now. Well, there weren't when I joined, but that was about 5 years ago, but that is starting to shift. Like I'm starting to see more like NNG style, you know, what we do is research. We're really focused on the research. It's not just like a side thing that we offer next to the design, but it's actually at the core of the design work. So I think one thing that I realize now looking back at like where I was maybe sophomore year when I was like UX, yes, I want to do UX, is I really didn't have a good understanding of the vast range of different ways to do UX, like the different contexts and products and topics and users and activities. There's just so much more than I realized when I was starting out. And I don't know, maybe that's changed. Maybe that's more like an artifact of the way things were like 8 years ago in UX. But that's like one thing, if I can give you a tip, if you're like interested in getting into UX, is like really try to be open-minded about the opportunities that are out there, because there may be a perfect UX job out there for you and you just don't even have a conception yet of what it's going to be. Like looking back, one thing I now really find very interesting is UX in the context of healthcare. And that was something I wasn't really on my radar. Like I knew we had a good partner. I knew that SILS had a good partnership with the health informatics side, but I wasn't really in that. And now that I have I have several clients who are in healthcare, it's just so fascinating to me. So like there are all these different paths that you can take and different sort of shapes that UX can take. And I don't know, it's just a really exciting field to be in. And it's been exciting, like looking back, you know, having wanted to work in this field for about 8 or 9 years now, it's interesting how much it's changed. Like there's so much more street cred for design. Like it's so much more of a popular topic, and there's a lot more, as a consequence, there's a lot more of a budget for it. Like a lot more organizations and companies are willing to pay for it, which really makes the work so much more fun. Like it is really not fun when you're in a situation like I was at IBM, where UX wasn't really a priority. So I had to like fight to get somebody to let me do a 5-person guerrilla style qualitative study. And I had literally zero budget, and I had to do it in addition to my development work. It wasn't like I could stop what I was working on and do it. I had to like add it on to my day job. And they said, you have no budget for incentives, so you can't offer people, you know, $100 for your time or anything like that. They're like, we just have this box of old t-shirts from a completely unrelated marketing campaign, and they're all extra, extra large t-shirts. And your target audience is professors who like don't have a lot of spare time. So try to convince professors to participate and just give them a extra, extra large t-shirt. That kind of UX is a lot harder than when you work in an organization where like UX is at the core of everything they do and it drives business decisions, and they're willing to give you, sorry, a puppy barking. They're willing to give you whatever you need to get the job done. That's a lot more fun. Anyway, that was kind of a ramble, Lori. I don't know if that's what you wanted.
No, that's exactly what we wanted, Kate. Do you feel like you could snapshot how the work is different between embedded and agency work?
Yeah, definitely. So partially I can kind of speak to that because of my work experience, but also because now in my work at Nielsen Norman Group, a lot of what I do is kind of like UX advice on like a meta level. Like a lot of what I do is I provide advice to UX professionals. So like guidance on how to do this kind of stuff, how to do the methodologies, you know, how to use different approaches and like documentations and deliverables and things and, you know, approaches. So in doing that, like I teach them concepts, but then also I learn from their experiences. You know, they tell me, this is the kind of situation we're dealing with right now. This is the kind of frustrations we have. And there's a lot of similarities. There's like a lot of things that are in common if you're doing UX work in-house or if you're doing it for an agency. But I guess some of the key differences would be with in-house, you're usually working on maybe a single product or a suite of products, or you might be working on services. So this is now a big thing in UX, is sort of this shift towards also design, service design, which is less focusing on a product. Like you might think of a product as like, do you guys know Rent the Runway? Have you ever heard of that? It's a service where you can rent clothes. So you pay like a monthly fee. It's kind of like Netflix for clothes, basically. So like you can think about the Rent the Runway app. That is a single product, or sometimes you call that a touch point. So it's a single product. But the service of Rent the Runway, so like the larger experience of being a subscriber and getting the clothes and unpacking the clothes and trying them on and shipping them back, that is more of the service design side. So anyway, so you might be working on a product, you might be working on a service, you might be working on a family of products. Like if you work at Microsoft, you might sort of touch on multiple products sort of in the course of your week-to-week work. But you are mostly focused on, like, I would say you are kind of the champion for a specific set of users. And that is really nice because you get to know that product really intimately, and it feels like you get a sense of ownership for it, and you feel like this is something that I like, you know, I work on all the time and it's getting better and I see it getting better year to year. If things are going well, this is how it feels. And I know these users so well, like I've done so much cumulative research, or maybe not you if you're more on the design side, but somebody else did, but you're still learning about these people. So like, that's kind of nice, that sense of building and like really creating something. That was what I really liked with in-house. But on the flip side of that is that you are kind of stuck with the same product. So if it's like not something you're really passionate about, like if you don't really care about like banking and finance, but you end up working for a banking finance company and you find it really dry and boring and tedious, then that's not super fun. You're also kind of like stuck with the same people all the time. So definitely some like tension can sometimes arise with your stakeholders if you're constantly getting shut down or something like that. But with the agency side, you do get more diversity of projects usually. I mean, you might work at an agency that specializes in a specific industry. Like you might work at an agency that specializes in healthcare, for example. And so in that case, you get to know a problem space or like a topic area really well. And so that can also feel like a sense of ownership, but you're sort of, well, it depends a lot on how long your contracts are, like how long your client projects are. So for example, we're a consultancy and we do a lot of like training and strategy guidance, but then we are also a little bit of an agency because we'll help people design something, we'll help them run a research study, we'll help them develop a skill on their team. And in that way, we're sort of like, I guess I would say like a short-term kind of an agency. Like we'll work on a project with a team for like a month. And then if they were a recurring client, we might work with them on another project, next year for about a month, but they're usually pretty short-term like that. And so in that way, you're getting a lot of different exposure to different teams and different products and different users and different problems. So you can like grow really quickly and feel like you have a lot of experience in a lot of different contexts, but you don't get that sense of ownership. And that does actually bum me out sometimes. Like sometimes I'll, be working with a team that I really like and we're working on something really cool and I have a lot of good suggestions for them that I am excited about. And then I don't get to see them implemented. Or I can check back in with that team like a year later and see how it's going, but I don't have the same sense of like ownership or, maybe pride in that product, I guess. But it's kind of nice because that means that if you have a bad project and you have a bad team that you don't like working with, then at the end of that project, you can be like, okay, I'm done with that. I don't have to work with those people anymore. Depending on the culture of the agency that if you work in an agency, depending on the culture, that can have a big impact on kind of like your work-life balance too. Like I definitely know people who work in some agencies where it's just like go, go, go all the time. And the clients just make up crazy deadlines for apparently no reason. And they leave you hanging, like you'll be like, okay, I'm going to design this website for you. You have to give me the content. Like this happened to us a couple times. We'd be like, okay, we need content because we can't build a website unless we know what's going to go into it. And they'll be like, yeah, we're going to get to that. And then they just drop it on your doorstep a week before a big deadline. And then you have to go back and fix everything because nothing fits the cut. So like those kinds of problems can happen. So, there's some benefits and drawbacks to both.
Thank you. I have a ton of questions I want to ask you, but I want to make sure we let our students, if they brought any questions. So I'll pause. I'm happy to read questions out of the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask away, but I'll give you about 30 seconds before I blast into my next round of questions. I was excited to get Kate. Oh, I see something in chat. Kate, what internships did you have in your undergrad?
So when I was an undergrad, I actually, that's how I got started at IBM. I got an internship at IBM as a content editor. So I really moved around a lot at IBM. I like started over in the content side. So basically what I was doing was editing technical articles and going into the CMS, the content management system, and uploading those articles, editing them, adding metadata, publishing them, stuff like that. And then from there, I took some classes at SILS, some computer science classes. Like I think it's a requirement. You have to take Computer Science 101, don't you?
Yes, for the major.
Yes, which is a great, I remember being a great class, but also so difficult. Like if you've never done any kind of coding in your life before that moment, it is hard to be like, how is the computer thinking, and trying to like get into that mindset. But that like kind of opened my eyes, and I really liked that. I really like, once I got it, I really, really liked it. So I kind of taught myself front end development and managed to get a full-time position there. So a lot of times people will ask me like, what is the best thing I can do to get started in a UX career? And I always say like, get that applied experience, especially when I'm talking to sales people, because I know you guys already have the theoretical. I know you're going to get the foundation that you need from sales. So the best thing you can do kind of proactively in addition to that is really trying to find an internship. And maybe it's not in a UX capacity. Although I know that like Raleigh has been, the tech scene in Raleigh is growing. Like we just had our first Nielsen Norman Group conference in Raleigh. Was that last year? It's either last year or the year before. And so, like there's more of those opportunities out there. But don't get discouraged if you might have to like, if you're trying to find an internship, you might have to like harass people to get it. Like, I remember when I reached out to Viget at that time, I was like, I want to do UX. IBM isn't really letting me do it. I've got to find somewhere else where I can really learn this stuff. So I remember just finding like every single agency, because at that time, again, I really thought, I was like, okay, I'm going to do UX design at an agency. That's my like life dream. So I was just like Googling agencies, like sending people these emails. And I remember being really discouraged because I was tracking them all in a spreadsheet. And I was like, man, so many people are not even taking the time to respond. Like, they're not even dignifying my like outreach with a response. And it's so disappointing. And that happens a lot when you're really new in UX, because again, people are just trying to get more experienced folks. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I know now that it was not personal. Like, it didn't mean I wasn't a good candidate. It's just, they had no use for somebody who is brand new in UX and would require a lot of like time and energy to teach. So I had to harass a lot of people, including Viget. When I contacted Viget, I think I was maybe one of the first people to do the UX apprenticeship program. I think it was like, that was the first year. And when I reached out to them, they were like, no, we're not looking to hire. We don't want an intern or anything like that. And then one person at Viget was like, well, she worked at like the HR side. And she was like, you know what, actually, I've been thinking about this apprenticeship idea. And I was like, let's get coffee and talk about it. Again, like wedging my foot in the door, and then talked her into giving me like an interview with other people at the company. And then they ended up letting me be an apprentice. And then it was a lot easier because I had something UX related on my resume, you know? So it was easier for me to get other doors open after that.
Exactly. That's so hard, the first one. When I started at SILS about 8 years ago now, one of the very first career fairs I was at, there was an agency from Chicago, and they were looking for UX folks, and they talked for a long time about online portfolios. And there wasn't, like, there's maybe 2 or 3 years where I maybe had a handful of students every year who said UX. Well, 3-4 years ago, every other person I talked to is like UX. So I'm wondering what your insight is on how, I feel like they have to have an online portfolio, but does it have to be dramatic? Can it be basic? Do they have to build their own from scratch? Like, what would your advice be on that?
Oh, I remember struggling with that real hard. I could not even count how many hours I probably spent building, designing and then building and then fleshing out different portfolios. And then I was into coding at the time, so I built my own from like scratch or from Bootstrap. And that was, looking back, that was probably a waste of time. That was probably not necessary. But then back then, you know, Squarespace was around, but it wasn't as big, or like it didn't have as many features. This is a question I get a lot from people who are trying to break into UX, especially when they're coming from other careers or from college. It is a good idea to have a portfolio. Exactly what it needs to be depends on what role you think you might want. Like, if you are looking to be like a UX designer with a strong emphasis on the visual design, and like that's kind of your background or your passion, then yeah, you should probably make sure that the visuals on your portfolio are pretty good. But if you are like more on the research and, you know, information science, human computer interaction side, like that was definitely mine. And I think if you're coming from SILS, that's probably a little bit more what you're leaning towards, I would guess. Not necessarily, but possibly. Then it's not so important if it's pretty. I mean, it shouldn't be like an eyesore, but it's totally fine if you just have like kind of a generic Squarespace site. Like that nobody's going to ding you for that. The most important things are, what are the projects that you're showing, and how are those projects kind of constructed and written? And we actually recently have been adding a lot of stuff on our website. So if you might be subscribed to the newsletter, but you may not know that we also have like, gosh, I don't know, probably tens of thousands of free articles on our site. And so this is something that we've been doing more of recently, is more of this advice for kind of like thinking less about the specifics of how to do UX, but more on the career side. And we just published a report, and I think it's free, but let me just check really quick. But we do have a couple articles on the site about like, what should my portfolio look like? What elements?
Oh, that'd be great.
And it, oh yeah, this is free. And
oh, good.
We just updated it. So I'm going to drop this in the chat for you guys.
Great. Thank you.
So
I know I've also heard from people about like, when you're deciding how to build the portfolio, employers are not so concerned that you were hired for these projects as much as you're like walking through your problem, decision making about the project. So you could come up with some of your own to showcase your thought.
100%. So like we talked about Kurt Ulrich earlier, who was who works at Viget, and the way that he actually got hired at Viget, he had the same problem we all do, which was like, he was like, how am I going to get hired when it's so hard to get experience? He started doing his own projects. So there was, I think he's told me that there was like a gas station near his house, and the gas station pump was just terribly designed. So he just went and hung out. People probably thought he was crazy, but he just like hung out at that gas station and watched people come up and use the gas station, and just like walked up to them and I was like, hey, I'm doing a research project. Can you tell me like how, he just like did a lightweight little interview. So it wasn't even like a full usability study, but he deeply analyzed how the system worked, where the issues were, what those were. He created deliverables kind of like you would for a real UX project for, a real stakeholder or client or something. And he proposed design solutions to fix those problems. And Viget was blown away by that. So that is definitely an option. And it's something I really recommend, if you're trying to get started and you don't have very many projects. I mean, one thing to know is, and I didn't realize this when I was starting, I thought I had to put every project that I'd ever done, I had to have that in my portfolio. That really, now on the other side, like being somebody who like interviews and hires people, I am not going to read 12 different project descriptions. If you have like 3 that are concise, like detailed but concise, which is kind of a hard line to walk, but like, discussing these were the problems that I saw in this system. Here's like a rich picture or like a mind map or, just even like, it doesn't have to be anything crazy formal, but just something that shows that you have that analytical kind of thinking. And that it's really about kind of showcasing, like I have design instincts. You don't have to be perfect. Like it doesn't have to be a perfect deliverable, because whoever hires you is probably going to train you on some of that anyway. But showing at least that you're like aware of it is really big. But definitely check out that careers report, because it's going to have more specifics in there.
That's great. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to pause my line of questions again to make sure there's students. This is why you're here. If you have any questions that have come up, even that you didn't walk in with today, but now have, I'll pause. If anybody wants to jump in.
Hey, Kate, I don't know quite how to ask this, but I feel like I see a lot of UX jobs that sort of want someone who does everything.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if like you have any advice for looking at jobs like that. That's maybe not the best place to apply, or are there certain skills that we should be focusing on more than others to get our foot in the door?
Well, it depends on where you're applying, definitely, but that's a super common problem that companies kind of want to recruit somebody who does everything, somebody who's like a perfect visual designer and a perfect interaction designer, and does content and can do the research and has a PhD. I've definitely seen a lot of job postings, and I remember doing that when I was applying before I worked at NNG. I was applying at different places, and I actually applied somewhere like that where I can't remember the specifics, but it was like, it did say something along the lines of like, we want like a perfect visual designer, interaction designer, and also you have to be able to write front-end code. You have to be a developer. So they were interested in me because I was a developer and I did UX, but I am not a graphic designer. Nobody should trust me to create their visual design. So I remember like in my informational interview, so it was the very first interview, it was with the woman who had posted the job posting. So she worked in HR. I can't even remember what the company was. But I asked her about that. I was like, so like, have you gotten many applicants who really fit all those criteria, who are really doing all those things? And she was like, no. It's like, she was like, I just talked to the teams and they told, she was very honest, bless her heart. She was like, I talked to the teams that like need somebody to do these things, and these are all the things they said. So we thought we'd try to hire somebody who does all of it. And I was like, you maybe want to go back and talk to them and, you know, see if maybe that you can hire 2 people, because I don't think you're going to find, like, sometimes we call that the unicorn UX person, does everything perfectly. That almost never happens. Like, even if you can passively, like, I can passively make my way through, you know, InDesign, I like sort of know how to use it, but like, that's not how my brain works, because my brain is on the research side and the development side. You know, like, very rarely is somebody perfect at all those things. So don't feel like you have to be perfect at all of those things. And it might be a red flag if it seems like they're going to be asking. Also, like, you don't have the bandwidth. Like, you won't have, that is like 3 jobs in one. Maybe you can do 2 jobs in one potentially, if, you know, you don't mind working long hours, but you can't do 3 probably. So you can, I would say it's a situation where, like, there's no harm in reaching out and like having that first interview and seeing what they really want. Because a lot of times I think it is a situation like what I had, where there's just somebody who's been told they have to hire someone and they don't really understand how this stuff works. So definitely don't feel like you have to do that. But they do say, you know, like, I'm sure you guys still talk about this, Lori. I remember being told that, you know, we should have those T-shaped skills. Have you guys heard that? Where you're like really deep, you know, a lot about one thing. Like, my thing is like information science. Like, that's, you know, human computer interaction and kind of the research. That's what I really focus in on. But then maybe you also have a little bit of skill in the visual design, or you've got a little bit of skill in, you know, business or something like that. So it's just about trying to be a well-rounded, like, professional, but you don't have to be perfect at everything.
Yeah, I totally agree, Katie. Kate, we had a job. I was on a search committee for a different part of the university, and the position included like social media and research, something else, like 3 things that don't really go together. And we got down to our top 2 candidates, and one had A, but a little B, and one had B, but a little A. And the search committee was like, it just depends what you want them to walk in the door with. They're going to have to pick up the other. So what is more important in this organization for them to like hit the ground running with as their T-shaped thing? If we have breadth and depth, like, what's their depth? And they can pick up some of the breadth. But you're right about those job descriptions. They're tough.
And I think from a recruiting perspective, there's no harm in like putting together your wish list, I guess, and like, you know, shooting for the stars. Maybe you get that candidate, but it's not likely. So yeah, I think another thing to be aware of if you're applying for jobs is that there's kind of this problem with the lexicon in user experience, because we are still such a young field relative to a lot of other fields. So there's not a lot of consistency across what any job role title actually means. Like, my husband works in environmental engineering. If you call somebody an environmental engineer, there are a very specific set of things that they have to know and that they do as their daily work. But if you call somebody a UX designer, it could do anything. Like, you've probably seen this. There's a lot of like job postings on LinkedIn where it says UX designer. But then if you actually look at the job description, it's like, no, you want a JavaScript developer. You just called this UX designer either because you don't really understand what it means, or because you know that's a trendy topic right now, and so you're gonna say UX designer and hope it entices people. Any other questions?
Hi, Kate.
Hi.
So I have a question about qualitative research and quantitative research, because I'm seeing a lot of, because data science and data scientists are becoming very popular, and my future lab is doing a lot of like modeling things. I was wondering whether because when I'm at SILS, we did a lot of like interviews, like qualitative research. So I was wondering how the quantitative research are applied in the UX field.
That's a great question. So I would say, like, generally every person who's going to be a UX professional should have some understanding of qualitative research, whether or not you're going to do it. Because in most, this does vary by the organization, but in most organizations, UX does a lot of qualitative research, and that's because qualitative research is really good at telling us what are the problems in this design, how do we fix those problems, what are the opportunities, you know, just getting those kinds of insight things. Also, qualitative is often cheap and easier to run. It's a lot easier to run a study with 5 participants than it is to run with 40 participants. So that is, like, I would say that tends to be, for a variety of reasons, that tends to be the majority way that UX research is done. But I actually teach a course on quantitative UX research, and that's something that, even though I find it's not done in as many UX teams, and it's often done incorrectly because people, like, on average, people have no conception of statistical concepts. That's another thing. I did not take, I think I didn't take a single math class when I was at SILS. I took one, but it was a first-year seminar, so I kind of skated by that math requirement. And now I wish that I had taken, you know, a stats class or 2. Because if you're going to be, you know, more on the quantitative side, that's a really valuable skill. That's also something that will make you more specialized. So maybe you wouldn't be as good of a fit for every role, but any big organization that has a decent sized budget for research, and they really are passionate about research, they would love to have somebody who's got the UX and also got the, you know, the data analyst side, and you can have a little bit of a handle on both. I know a lot of teams who would love to have somebody like that. It's probably going to be more on the in-house side, but it could be agencies as well. So that's a really good specialization skill. And that's a great example of one of those things that, like, I had no idea that that could be, like, a interesting job when I was in, like, my sophomore year. I just didn't even know that that kind of thing existed. So definitely, like, keep an open mind about what you might like. Anything else? And what I'll do now is, I don't know if you sent this out already, Lori, but I'll just type my email address in the chat. And if you guys have any, like, individual questions, you can feel free to reach out to me.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Kate,
So
while you're typing, I wanted to just ask, you know, I think it's great that you're at Nielsen Norman Group and they have all these reference articles for people, but do you have any tips on professional development in the UX world? We have a connection with Tri-UXPA over the last couple of years. I think they came, I don't think they came at all this academic year, but, you know, we lost a quarter of the year to the pandemic. So, but are there things that you see from your colleagues and how they're keeping up with UX in terms of professional development, not only for trends, but also for connections?
Yeah, I think that networking is really important in UX. I mean, I've never worked in another field, so it could be also equally important in other fields. I don't know. I just know that this field, because of the nature of our work, because we're working with technology and the kinds of things that we can design, is shifting so fast. Like, now we have to figure out, like, how do we fit UX design into VR and AR and voice interfacing, and, like, because those things are changing so rapidly. The nature of our field is also evolving really fast. And it's very hard for academia to keep up with that. Like, Lori, I know that's something that I've talked to Professor Berquist and I've talked to Faye about quite a bit, that, like, it's really hard to try to keep up with that pace. And I think the way that SILS does it is they focus on kind of the fundamental, like, human information seeking behavior things. And it's interesting that those things don't really change over time. Like, those things stay constant. So sort of the foundation you're building now, that will remain valuable for decades. Like, that will still be similar, even if the technology is different. But the flip side of that is you still do have to keep up with those changes. So I think networking is huge, like connecting with other people in the area. So Tri-UXPA is really great for that. SILS does these events, so that's a great way to get started, like expanding your local network. Also, you know, finding blogs that you like that, you know, I remember, what did I read? I read like Smashing Magazine when I was in school a lot, and A List Apart. So just finding like, you know, sources that are entertaining. We didn't have Medium back then. Gosh, I sound old. Back in my day, we didn't have Medium. But like that's a good resource. I really like Twitter. Some people I know say that like Twitter is old fashioned, but like the UX community is still very strong on Twitter. So
Twitter is old fashioned?
That's what they say now. That's what they say, Lori. I don't know.
Oh, that's
Today,
terrible.
Snapchat. So yeah, like I like Twitter for that, because then I keep in touch with a lot of different people who are really active in UX, and you know, kind of see as things change. You can just kind of passively like tap in there and just see what's new. Those are the cheapest, easiest ways to keep in touch. There are also a lot of places will do free webinars. Like if you're interested in like data and quantitative analysis and analytics, a lot of different analytics tools like Google Analytics, like Mixpanel, they have a lot of these free webinars about different topics. NNG, unfortunately, is like, we do a lot of these free articles, we do free reports, but we do tend to target more of like an established professional audience that has the budget to pay $3,000 and go to a conference. So when I was in college, I loved NNG, I loved the articles, but I could not have afforded to go to a conference. So I do not recommend spending your money. Don't tell Jacob I said that, but don't spend your money on a professional conference just yet. Wait till you're working at a company and you can get them to pay that for you. But yeah, I mean, like that's what we do, is we write those articles for people. There are other companies like NNG, like Baymard is a big one. They really specialize in e-commerce specifically, but they do really nice in-depth analysis of different e-commerce features. Yeah, just kind of exploring what's out there and just taking advantage of the free resources that are available, because there is a lot out there. Those are the biggest things I would say.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, first I want to thank Kate for spending the time with SILS today. I really appreciate it. We have been singing her praises on the Professor Berquist wing of SILS for years. So when she was free this week to jump in on this new initiative, I was thrilled. So thank you very much. And
sure, great. It's easier than driving to Chapel Hill. So.
That's right. I think it's going to be the wave of the future. We might be doing this. So I wanted to let students know that we are planning a mid-July and early fall adaptation of this, where we're going to hopefully have different themes each time and different alums to participate. So by the end of the week, please look for an email from me with a brief survey to get your feedback, because we want these to be as helpful for you as possible. And we hope to see you at any of the future events that are going on this week. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. This was fun. It was nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.